will hand it over to staff. Welcome.
Great. Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Mark Wittenburg. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the city. And welcome. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. This is going to be an overview. This is a really deep subject, so I just want you to know this is going to be an overview of a little bit of an introduction of what artificial intelligence is, what we're doing to prepare at the City of Raleigh, some of our current and planned use cases around AI, along with developing technologies and innovation that we're seeing in the field, and then what's next for us. First, a little bit of level setting. So what is artificial intelligence? First of all, I want to start off with any of you trivia buffs. Artificial intelligence has been around since 1956. Actually started at a conference where several computer scientists got together and they coined the phrase artificial intelligence. But you can think of artificial intelligence as like this big overarching subject with these other areas down below. So at its core, or at its foundation, artificial intelligence is like a very smart assistant that can look at a vast amount of data, perform calculations on that data, and then provide results. A good example of this is actually with our stormwater division. I was actually driving home the other day during the storm, and I don't know if you've ever had this happen where the first block, it's pouring rain, you've got the windshield wipers are going full blast, you go another block, and it's not raining at all. If we were to use our rain gauges, which are actually dispersed throughout the city to predict the amount of rainfall and make decisions, it actually wouldn't provide a clear picture. So what we do is we use gauge-adjusted rainfall, or radar rainfall, there, I got that acronym right, to be able to look at the radar and then make predictions and layer that along with the information we're receiving to provide a more accurate picture that we can then make decisions using modeling to understand what our rainfall is. We use this for public safety, for alerting the public, and for predicting or how we're going to handle the rainfall. The idea here is that...
I will just say, Councilor Silver has an excused absence, so I will state that for the record. Sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely, no worries. The next one is we're going to dive into machine learning. So machine learning is taking that model of looking at a vast amount of data and then being able to train the model. A good example here is intersection safety. We have cameras at various intersections throughout the city, and it used to be that we would count cars. You ever drive over one of those cables in the street and it would count the car? Unfortunately, that doesn't count bicyclists, pedestrians, it just counts the cars. Or you can stand at an intersection and physically count the vehicles. What we were able to do is we were able to train the system to look at the video and to be able to understand the differences between like a truck, a car, a pedestrian, or a bicyclist. And then we were able to take it one step further and start to look at the lanes and understand churning movements, the situation in the intersection. Transportation takes all that information, and now that instead of just a point in time, they can look at this over a vast amount of time to be able to make intersection changes, like adding a right turn lane to improve intersection safety. The last piece is deep learning. So deep learning is what you've all been hearing about in the news. This is the generative AI. So when you hear about ChatGPT, Gemini, large language models, that fits into the deep learning section of artificial intelligence. For the remainder of the presentation, this is what we're going to focus on because this is the latest, the coolest thing that you're all hearing about. But I just wanted you to be aware that we've been doing artificial intelligence at the city for quite a while. So what are the impacts? Gartner, who's a research firm, is actually calling this like a new age, or the age of cyber-physical systems. I don't even begin to understand exactly what that means. But for you all, it means that it's transformative. Kind of like the industrial age, we went from steam engines to combustion. It's kind of the same thing. We're going from the information age to this age where computers are just much faster and able to do much more because we have that capability or the speed. So we're seeing impacts in productivity. For example, Lou actually asked me for an abstract for this presentation, and he needed it by noon. I took the presentation and all the backup material, fed it into ChatGPT, and it produced the abstract that you see in your information. I was able to do that very quickly, but the key is to look it over, make sure that the human's looking over that. But we're seeing examples in productivity. The job market, just like any other industrial revolution, the job market is going to have some impact in the jobs that we're doing. We want to make sure that we're upskilling our employees and that we're providing training for those employees. But there are definitely going to be impacts to the job market, and we're seeing this transformational period. I kind of liken artificial intelligence to what the calculator did to the slide rule, right? Think of it as this new tool that's available to help you do your job better. The economic development piece of it, there's definitely opportunity in the research triangle. We're seeing companies that are using artificial intelligence to be able to come to market much quicker. We're seeing opportunities in startups and entrepreneurs that are diving into this artificial intelligence and providing systems. And then the last impact is environmental. I mentioned that computers, it's a lot of computing power. I saw a report that some of the big companies like Microsoft and Google are using anywhere from 30% to 50% more power. And Microsoft is actually going to be purchasing some of the power from 3 Mile Island and restarting 3 Mile Island. May sound a little scary, but again, they're trying to figure out how to be carbon neutral in providing this computing power. So what are some of the challenges and the risks and the threats around artificial intelligence? Well, bad actors. When we think about bad actors, let's think about the good actors first. We're all thinking, how do we do this in an ethical and responsible manner? Think about the bad actors. Do you think they're thinking about the same thing? Do you think that the criminals are thinking, wow, I need to make sure that I'm ethical about this? Probably not. So the bad actors are actually, they're employing artificial intelligence much quicker than we can. And then around the company AI use, we need to be very cognizant what we feed into artificial intelligence. What are some of the failures? Deepfake. I don't know if you remember, but during the governor's race, one of the candidates, there were a bunch of statements that the candidate had made. Somebody took and created a deepfake, taking those statements and then creating that person actually saying those. So it's kind of one of those weird things where the person said these things, but the deep fake was the person actually seeing a video of them saying these things. And so I know there's legislature that is going through to talk about the political aspects of this and protections around deep fakes. Promptware is prompting AI to make it make mistakes or to teach it bad things. Because remember, these models are learning, that machine learning. It's almost like telling it the wrong things. And then there's privacy. There's no undo button on ChatGPT. If you feed something into ChatGPT, it is there, and it is going to use that as data. So if you feed it intellectual property or information about the city or our infrastructure, it now knows about that. So we have to be very careful and make sure that there's guardrails around that. And then there's the unwanted bias is a big one. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, which is these models are basing their information on the data that's being provided. And if that data is biased, it's going to produce a biased answer. For example, I asked ChatGPT to create a picture of a banker helping a client. And what do you think that the banker turned out to be? White male in a suit. Absolutely. And then what are some of the results? Financial implications. There's an example of an airline that had a ChatGPT or like agent that provided some incorrect information to a client that resulted in a higher cost for that person's ticket. They ended up taking the airline to court, and the court sided in favor of the plaintiff, which meant that they had to reimburse that person. So the answers that these AI agents are providing are just as legally responsible as anything else, like a human providing that answer. And then human injury, I don't think we'll do anything like this, but there are examples out there where Google or Waze takes somebody on a dangerous route, or if it doesn't know that a route is now no longer valid, it will take them down a route potentially that could cause injury. At the foundation of AI, I mentioned data already once, but that's really where it starts. It starts around that security and privacy, is we need to make sure that the data that we're feeding, that's how it's getting those answers. So we need to make sure that that data is secure and that we're also keeping that data private. For example, if we are looking at our infrastructure, at our water infrastructure, we want to make sure that we're not feeding that to an open model and that infrastructure gets out there. Another thing is organization. I was recently at the bookstore. Yes, I still like books, even though I'm a computer guy. But it's interesting because in the fiction area, it's all arranged by author. And in the nonfiction, it's arranged by the subject. Same thing with ChatGPT or any kind of AI technology, is you have to arrange the data in such a way that it can get to it quickly and it can get to it accurately. So we need to make sure that the library, we can't just throw it and say we're going to throw it at our website and let it peruse the whole website. We need to make sure that we're organizing the data in a manner that the system can go through and do that quickly. And then the integrity of the data. If the data is wrong, it's going to produce a wrong answer. If the data is biased, like example there would be, I inherited a large book collection from my grandmother, and she was a big horror novelist kind of person. So if somebody came and looked at my library, they might make an assumption that I like horror instead of science fiction. Probably couldn't have guessed that. One of the first things, what's that?
The way you pronounced horror.
Horror. You can see now why I don't read those types of novels, and that's why I stick with science fiction. If you can't pronounce it, don't read it, right? How does AI pronounce it? The next thing we're working on is a policy. The policy is around what are the do's and don'ts around the use of AI. Again, we've been using AI for years, and so this is nothing new, but the generative AI is just a whole new area, and because generative AI creates new things, there's some concerns there, where before AI was just taking the data that we already had and making decisions and predictions based on that data. Now with generative AI, it's coming up with new things. So the risks, we talked about some of the challenges and risks already, and so we want to make sure that we're addressing those. We've talked a little bit about the bias. So in the policy, we're making sure, or we're asking that a human be involved in checking those answers. Do the answers make sense? Is it the answer that you want? I hate to go back to my library example, but that I like science fiction. I'm not going to say the other word. So making sure that those biases aren't there, or that we're mitigating them as much as possible. One of the examples there is going back to the banker example. As I'm going through the presentation, you'll notice some of the pictures are actually generated by ChatGPT. And there were several instances where I had to go back in and prompt it to be more diverse or take the third wheel off the car. It does weird things like that. Transparency is another big thing, is if we're going to produce an answer, and this goes back to college days, which is if you're going to quote something, you should cite the source. Same thing here, is if we're going to provide an answer, we should be providing where the source of that answer came from so you can go to the source and actually read the information yourself. And then we're transparent about the use of AI if we're using it. And then accountability. Again, going back to the airline example, is we need to be accountable for the answers. Again, that human is so important in a check, and that's why the human is in the center of that. And then the safety. We need to ensure that any of the answers or use of AI that we have the community safety in mind. I'm going to say it again just because I think it's so important. The human is at the center of all this. I remember my math teacher always telling me, it's like, solve the math equation, but at the end, look at it. Does the answer make sense? And that's the same thing here, is as we're starting to deploy these technologies, we really want to start internally, and so we have somebody checking those answers to ensure that accuracy, the accountability, transparency, all the other pieces. So what are some of the current use cases? First one is Raleigh. I don't know if you've all heard of Raleigh, but that is our internal computer assistance for getting IT help. Raleigh is a chat bot, and it allows you to ask it questions about, like, how do I get a laptop? And it uses our database to be able to formulate answers and provide those answers back. So we've implemented a generative AI chat bot internally for internal employee use, and this is our way of testing out the technology before we were to deploy it externally to our community. One of the cool things about Raleigh is it started to learn very quickly. And where it started versus now, you can ask it something or say something like, my name has changed. And it has actually learned based upon the things we've done for name changes to say, oh, if your name has changed, you need to change it here in PeopleSoft. You need to change it here. And by the way, do you need new business cards? And would you like to order business cards? So the idea is that it starts to learn what our processes are to be able to provide better answers. Web search is another thing we're testing internally first, and this is that search assistant that you see at the right. But you can ask things like, how do I report a missed trash collection? And it will provide an answer with a number. And then you can also see the find out more, there's the reference to where it's pulling the information and where it's pulling the documentation. But we've asked it things like, what is the latest with BRT? Or you can have it search the website. And again, it's that generative, so it's learning and it's looking through our website. Couple of key points here. With Raleigh, we're pointing it at our internal IT information. With the web search, we're specifically pointing it at our website, so it's not pulling information from the rest of the world. Public utilities is another great example. Public utilities was looking at the types of materials and failure rates for materials and water pipes that are in the ground. So they contracted with a firm to pull all of your old records, all the old council records, back as far as we could go, along with purchase documentation and any other public information that we could find, and amassed it into a large database. Then we organized that database, like the fiction, nonfiction, arranging the database. And now we can start to ask it questions about the types of material that the water pipes, and if we focus in and provide it data about failures of specific products, we can now start to see where that might be in our infrastructure and make predictions of where there might be line breaks or future predictions of where we might have failures. What we thought was really cool is the model was created for public utilities, but then we asked it, like, who are the past 7 mayors? And it answered the question correctly. So we're thinking that we'll be able to pull that model in and provide a query for old public records. For example, like how much hay did the horses eat in the 1800s? And we'd be able to pull that. I don't know if we can do that, but that's an example.
So just for the public, what is available to residents of Raleigh now, and how do they access this?
So this is internal only,
Okay.
because we're still testing internally. So specifically, these are all things that we're doing internally. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about what our planned use cases, which is going to start to touch on the public. And then the last one, I'm sure you've all heard, and I don't know, it'd be interesting to see how many have used ChatGPT, but we've deployed ChatGPT teams and provided upskilling and training for employees. And ChatGPT is an amazing tool at writing. For example, like I mentioned in the abstract, creating pictures, creating new things. It's also fantastic for responding to emails and things like that. But we're encouraging employees to use this tool in their day-to-day in productivity, increased productivity. So the planned use cases, and this is what we're starting to look for in the future. The building code search, and Councilmember Silver isn't here, but I was going to say the UDO, right, which is, he loves acronyms, right? But the building code is quite complex. So one of the things we're going to be starting to test is being able to use generative AI in front of the building code to start to ask questions like, I'm building a fence, what do I need to do? And then it would query our UDO to provide that answer. The next step would then be to start to step them through the permitting process. So that's what we're starting to look at for the future is, again, that human piece of it, which is providing this to the internal agents that are handling these calls, checking the data before we release it to the public. So this is just one use case that we're starting to examine. The second one, you're going to be hearing more about customer service and the customer experience and the work that Karen Ray is doing around the customer experience and management for city services. Sorry, got hung up on that one a little bit. We're going to be initially rolling out in the June-July timeframe our online portal, and that online portal is going to have the basic services and things that people do on a daily basis. In the background, AI is going to be used to start to look for patterns, and what we're looking for are those other categories. It's the categories where somebody hasn't found what they're looking for. They found pothole or missed trash can, but there's something or some service that they want that they don't see there, and so they write it out in text. We'll be using AI in the background to start to look at those patterns, to design workflows, and then allow us to accelerate putting those onto the portal. That's the first step. The second step will be to enable generative AI where you'll be able to call, chat, social media, email, and all of that will go into a chat bot, into the same generative AI, so we're producing the same answers for that customer. So the idea there is to provide those answers much more quickly. If it's an informational, it can search our database and provide that information right away without having the person wait for an agent or waiting for somebody from a staff member to call back. So more to come on that. And then Microsoft Copilot is something else that we're looking at. Microsoft Copilot goes along with your Office products, so your Microsoft Word, your PowerPoint. It allows you to use generative AI to assist in the design and writing of documents, checking your grammar, which is very helpful for me, your pronunciations, even more helpful. But it's really like that assistant. An example I use, Microsoft Copilot, I had it last week, so yes, I am using it. Last week, I had it summarize last week's emails, prioritize those emails, and then provide responses. It took it about a minute, and it did all that. Now you may ask, well, how does it know the priorities? That's the machine learning part of it. I said, well, no, actually this one's a priority. And if you see something from the city manager, that's probably a top priority. So it starts to learn what my priorities are and starts to figure out those to provide better answers. So some developing technologies. The first one I want to touch on is video analytics. I don't know if you all recognize this video, but it is actually a building that is just next door. We're flying this building with drones about every 2 to 3 weeks, and we're documenting the construction progress as we go. So the developing technology, this is what we're doing today, but in the future, video analytics is going to get much better with the generative and this deep learning piece of it. For example, we'd be able to do space planning and say, based upon the video that you're seeing, ingest this, and what would be the best layout for an information technology department? And it would provide that answer. Another example is video analytics and picture analytics. Where they're starting to head is ingesting a picture and then asking it where is the best place to hide, and the generative technology will say, well, next to the stove, but check to make sure it's not hot. That's where we're heading with this, is the ability to be able to analyze these types of pictures, these types of videos, and then start to ask it questions. Adaptive systems is the next thing. Right now, when we think about these generative agents, it's pulling on data that we have and really that human component of checking the data. Where they're heading is agentic AI, or these adaptive systems, which is now imagine that the agent is self-contained and can start to make decisions on its own based upon the information that it's gathering from past experience. So the example here is looking at our city downtown and the heat island map. What we'll be able to do is take a digital twin of this, which we already have, and then based upon what we're building, the trees we're planting, and the things we're doing, we can start to make future predictions about the climate. So again, taking something we have and then making predictions about the future. And again, this is a developing technology, so this is where the industry is heading and what the future is. The last thing, quantum computing. It's trying to figure out how to explain this. So take the computer, what we're doing today, and imagine it's like 10 times faster, maybe even more than that. What is the computer speeds that we have today has allowed us to get where we are with generative technology and with artificial intelligence. Now imagine that computers in the near future are going to be very, very fast. So imagine the possibilities and imagine the computing power that we're going to have. How far in the future? Microsoft has just released their first quantum computing chip, and this is like in the last month or so. So this is really coming about very quickly. But this is going to change the landscape of what you see. So what we have today, imagine it much, much faster and much more available. So what's next for the city of Raleigh? So the first thing is we're really putting the finishing touches on that AI policy. We're making sure that we have those guardrails in place. And so as we start to deploy this technology, that we're doing it in a very thoughtful and a very prescribed methodology. The second thing is continued education, really starting with you all here today, which is just this high-level overview of what we're doing. Again, we can dive deep into any one of these various subjects. Also upskilling our employees. We're already offering classes on ChatGPT, but we're going to be offering those co-pilot classes, and then we really want to get together and start sharing these use cases where we see departments using AI and how they're doing it. We want to make sure that we're piloting those use cases and moving those use cases forward that we discussed and looking for other opportunities. The last thing is we're really tracking that vendor innovation. So we're watching what's happening out there. We're watching peer cities, and we're watching those developments to see how those can be used here. And with that, myself, ChatGPT, and Copilot are here to answer any questions.
We have questions? Go for it.
I always have questions. Hi, thanks for this. I've been eagerly awaiting our AI policy. I'm curious, will it come back to council for, like, the AI policy once it's finished? It will require council approval?
So typically the AI or a policy would go through the staff policy process, and that's where it is. It's just starting to enter the policy. But Madam City Manager?
Yes, it is an administrative policy, but after we get to the point of implementation, we would come back and do an update and a refresh of what the policy entails, how it's going to govern how we work, as well as the governance structure for the policy.
Got it, okay. Helpful. I'm curious about several things. I've got several questions. First, going back to Raleigh, the internal search tool. Is someone quality testing it? Like, is someone a human going back through and saying, these are the answers it provided to the questions, and marking, yes, you were accurate, so that it can continue to learn from its mistakes?
Yes, correct. So both Raleigh and the web search tools have a log of the questions and then the answers it provided, and we are going back and looking through those logs to make sure that the answers are correct. The other piece of it is we're using those for our internal agents so that they can ask it questions and then review the answers to ensure that accuracy. And that's really the big thing is we want to make sure that we're internally testing these things first.
Sure. Absolutely. And then you mentioned that it, for the web search, you've got the database pointed at the City of Raleigh website. But we've been told previously related to the website refresh, there's like thousands and thousands of pages, and some of them are relevant, and there's probably archive pages that are not. Is it able to access old pages and accidentally give a false answer?
So I'm going to go back to the security piece of it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm also going to provide like a co-pilot example. The data is so critical to this, and so this is a very good question. I'm going to answer the web question, but I'm going to form it in, like, let's say a Word document. We were working on a Word document, we're collaborating. At the end of the day, we abandoned this document and we started a new one, finished that, that's the one we published. If that old document is out there and not marked as a draft, AI will find it if it has access to it, and it will use that information to provide answers. That's part of the data cleanup that we need to go about doing. As part of the redesign of the website, that is exactly one of the things that we're going to do, is we're going to be looking for old, outdated sites, or sites that may have contradictory information. And that's another area where AI will help us out quite a bit, is it will be able to start to identify those areas. So we're going to be working very closely, IT is going to be working very closely with communications as we go through the website redesign.
And then I will just ask a couple more, and then I'll pass the mic and come back to my other questions if there's more time. But I work in customer service. We have a chatbot. I would just offer, I know you're not the lead on that, but to Karen Ray or whomever, I would just offer, for the sake of your agents, to make it somewhat easy for people to ultimately get to the human. If it's too hard or the loop is too long, people are irate by the time they reach the human, and it's a burnout and churn risk for your agents. So just a heads up on that. And then, one thing we know is that like the prompt you put in determines the outcome you get out, right? And you said you were offering training, but I wonder, will you move to mandating training for particular divisions of the city that are likely to use this, particularly in like outward focus, like customer focused uses? So I'm just thinking, like, if I put in, help me write a response for this bleep customer who's being so awful to me, I'm gonna get one response, versus if I write something like, this customer is frustrated, help me manage their frustrations. Right? Like the content you put in determines the content you get out. Will the policy put guardrails on like what people are putting in, and then also like, are you gonna move to mandating training for relevant employees?
So the training is a lot of the training is prompt engineering. So you definitely nailed it right there, which is exactly what you ask it is the output you're going to get. And sometimes you can lead the technology or a prompt where you may not get the answer you're exactly looking for. Copilot, as we roll Copilot out, we're going to have a limited number of licenses, and so we are considering a mandatory training. Like, if you want a license for Copilot, you need to go through the training, and part of the training would be the AI policy. Along with the policy, we're also creating an AI guidebook to kind of go along with it, to be more plain English, like here are the do's and the don'ts, and here's best practice. So those are definitely things that we're considering.
I'll pause.
Thank you so much for all of this. As we go into, and you're doing the policy work now, how long from when you first started doing this to get to this point? What does that time frame look like?
It's been about 6 months to get to this point. And part of that is Raleigh was a founding member in the AI Coalition, which is a coalition of about 300 governments and 500 members, and growing very quickly from state, local and federal levels of government. So as a collaborative, we all work together to come up with like those guardrails and the things we should be doing. So we were able to accelerate this very quickly based upon our membership in the coalition.
Amazing. I'm just trying to get a sense of how long these things take to do because it's such an ever-evolving technology, and I can't even get to the quantum, that my brain doesn't even function there. So I can't imagine how long that would take. So I'm just getting a snapshot. When you say guardrail, I understand that you guys are creating them right now, but teach me what a guardrail is and what are the things that you're looking for to make sure we're, just an example, you don't need to tell me all of them because I'm sure there's a ton.
So one of the guardrails be our own intellectual property, making sure that somebody, if they're using an open model like ChatGPT, which is open to the world, that we're not feeding it proprietary data. For example, creating this presentation, I said, I am presenting to a city council, a large city council on AI, produce like this picture. What I didn't want to do is I didn't want to feed it, I work for the city of Raleigh, and here's my information. So we need to be very cautious about that because, like I said, there's no undo button. So one of the guardrails would be around the information that you're feeding into the prompt.
Got it. And then last question for me, as you look to implement it, are you going to be prioritizing specific departments that you're focused on? Because it sounds like if we just open it up, it's a lot of information for everybody. Is there a targeted way, like we're going to start with planning or I don't know, I'll leave that for you to answer.
So we have a governance committee that's formed that governs not only AI, but many technologies. So our security policies and the way we spend our money on technology, but that committee, that IT governance committee, is responsible for the prioritization. That committee is made up of members of the city manager's office along with every department head. So as a group, we're looking at like, how can this best benefit the community? When we start to prioritize, we're really looking at how can we add the most value and how can we do it in a safe manner that meets all the policy.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So you mentioned about proprietary information and it not being used. Is there a way, and are we able to tag any information that is being pulled, maybe where the server can tag it and say, hey, user X, they get a message, are you sure you want to use this information? Or it goes to a security team that says, hey, this was used by user Y, just as FY, as a log.
So yes, the water example that I provided is pulling data that's public record, but it's in a closed model. In other words, it's in a model that's ours and in our closed environment. So the rest of the world doesn't have access to it. ChatGPT doesn't have access to it, just us. For those types of models, the guardrails are much wider because we don't have to be as worried about feeding it proprietary data because it's our data, our model on our servers. Then with Microsoft Copilot, one of the switches is Microsoft Copilot only looks at our internal data. It doesn't go out to the outside world unless you toggle it. There's actually going to be a toggle switch that you have to click purposefully, and then it will come up with a warning. We're still working out those details, but it will come up with a warning that says, hey, you are now entering information into an open model, so you need to make sure that these guardrails are to make sure you're not providing proprietary information.
Yeah, there. I'm going to go back to Councilor Patton.
Sorry, more from me. One thing I know that the last time I attended like a conference where this was a topic, that one thing that was unclear at that time is what aspects of prompts and outcomes would be matters of public record. Is there any news there?
Yes, and I might refer to the city attorneys, but we've had multiple conversations with the city attorney's office. This is providing or creating new content and providing it to the public, which means it is absolutely a public record. For example, you can use the technology to take minutes from this meeting or actually record this meeting and then create a summary of this meeting with action items. That becomes a public record because it is generating a new document That's why it's so important that that human really look over those minutes to make sure that they're accurate and then get posted like we would any other minutes or documentation of a meeting.
So is it only when something is sort of accepted, like if it, in this example, if it generates the document and you give it a scan and you're like, well, that's garbage, I'm gonna have to make this myself, and you sort of reject it, that is not considered to be a record?
I might have to defer here, but I'm going to try to explain it, and then the city attorney can either like shake your head yes or no. But there's a difference between transient records and then the actual public record. And so a transient record, like if I were to take notes or post-it notes and kind of like, here are my notes from this meeting, and I'm gathering all those notes together, and then I create this final document. The final document becomes the record. These other things become transient records and they can be discarded. And so the same would apply here, is anything that's being used to create the final record could be discarded.
Okay, understood, got it.
How did I do, city attorney? Okay.
Awesome. And then just two more. One is about the environmental impact. Obviously, lots of opportunities with AI, but the environmental impact is really real. It takes a lot of, as you said, a lot of computing power. The data resource centers that are housing all this information, the like server farms are huge. They use a lot of water and a lot of power. And we have a climate action plan, and I wonder how it's being discussed. You know, if we buy licenses for Microsoft Copilot, we could theoretically be like, well, that's Microsoft's climate challenge, but not ours. But in the same way, we are participating in the system. So how is the sort of climate impact conversation going?
To be honest, we're just starting to have those conversations and to figure out like how we're going to move forward. But one of the things we're definitely looking at is how the power is generated and what these companies are doing. So for example, Microsoft seems to be more efficient than some of the other companies that are employing AI. Honestly, I can't answer that fully because we're just starting down that road and just starting down what are the impacts. But that is definitely a consideration as we're moving things forward.
Okay, good. Well, I hope you'll keep it on the top of mind. And then if you have one.
Yeah, thank you for this. It's great to see. I love this image. Would love to have, anyway, the upside is great. And I'm glad we're in a consortium of thinking through these. I think about downsides. And even if the city of Raleigh has protected, I just think about all the sewer pipes, the gas pipes, all the sort of infrastructure and the mapping of that. And even if we really protect all that information, all of the thousands of people who have sought permits and have these drawings themselves, you know, you're not as certain. So how do we take a really big risk sort of view of this and protect everyone in this city from downside utilization of some of these this information?
Honestly, that's why we're taking a very programmatic step forward. Is we don't want to be on the bleeding edge of this. We want to be very cautious, and we want to make sure that we have the policies in place to protect that data and to protect the community and make sure that we do have those guardrails in place. And that's why we're doing it in this order. And that's why we haven't released anything to the public yet, is we want to make sure that before we do that, that we've hit all those challenges, we've hit all those risks, and that honestly we have a plan around those if something were to happen, that we understand this is what we would do. We want to make sure that that's all in place. But this is nothing new. That before AI, we had all of this data and we had to protect this data. Mm-hmm. And that's why I have the bags under my eyes, is because I don't sleep at night worrying about this type of thing and what would happen if. So again, I just want to assure you that at the foundation of that data layer, you notice that security was at that foundation, because everything that we do starts there. And it starts with protecting the community, starts with protecting the data.
Thank you. Yep.
So I'm processing all of the information. And I heard you say, you have to be careful what you put in. Is there a way to unlearn something as AI?
It depends on the AI. If it's ChatGPT, no. If it's our own internal AI, yes. And that's one of the reasons that as we deploy, we're going to be deploying a model that we own, so that if it were to produce an answer that is biased, incorrect, that we can go in, correct the data, correct the model, and then move forward. As opposed to an open model like ChatGPT or Gemini, we really don't have control over that. We only have control over the data that we're providing it. What we could do is, if there is incorrect data, or if ChatGPT were producing an incorrect answer, would be to give it more data. So feed data to news media, or create an article that would correct that information.
Oh, wow. So I understand why that's could be scary for some, because they can't erase that information. They, meaning AI, can't erase that information. We would just need to feed it more accurate information to counterbalance the incorrect data that it has.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much for this
Thank you.
work. Looking forward to the next steps. All right. And with that, the work session is adjourned.